From the Godrej DEI Lab, welcome to India Included. Here is your host, Parmesh Shahani.
Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of India Included. I am your host Parmesh Shahani, and this is going to be a brilliant, thought-provoking, enlightening episode in which you will learn so much about the history and the future of DEI with one of the world's OG DEI experts. So put on your seatbelts and get ready for the ride. You know, even before I founded the Godrej DEI Lab, people were asking me about the quote-unquote backlash against DEI. And they were saying like, you know, isn't DEI an American concept? Hasn't it been imposed on the Indian corporate sector by all these MNCs, tuned into US concepts of social justice, and now they want to put that on us? Is it woke? And now since the US and all are turning against DEI and, you know, anti-wokeness and all of this, is India also going to become anti-DEI? And obviously, right, for me, the counter-argument is pretty easy, as I'm sure it is for everyone who's listening. No, DEI is not an American concept. The idea of social and economic justice was not invented in a boardroom in California. These are actually ideals that have been dreamed and fought for throughout the world, right? You know, ideas, you know, that are the bedrock of DEI are also what give us in India our constitutional values. They are part of the laws that Indian workplaces have to follow. And as you've heard, and I hope will continue to hear throughout this podcast, please listen to all our episodes. All of them are epic. DEI is something that we in India take very, very seriously as people take in other parts of the world. Second, while there is a lot of noise about ending DEI and ending wokeness, and you can't see me, but I'm air quoting around wokeness in the studio, in the US, the signals are actually more mixed. All the polls are consistently showing that most people in the US actually like and accept the idea of racial inclusivity, of cultural sensitivity, of gender equity, and of queer justice. They don't hate pride or the idea of more people from historically excluded groups in the boardroom. And corporate US is reacting to both the signal and the noise. They are going quiet about programs that might attract trolling, for example, but actually staying quite committed to fairness and anti-discrimination. And, you know, as for global impact of some of this, I can tell you that at least one US origin firm that might have publicly rolled back pride in the US just had me over to the Indian campus to speak to their queer ERG. So it wasn't just for my good looks, although I must say that has often played a part. Now, what to do? But as Nargis sang, "Dunya mein aaye hain to jeena hi parega." End quote. More broadly, right, these tensions and these conflicts in DEI have always existed, right? And my guest today is a true giant, someone whose life's work has involved confronting and resolving these complexities. She's a veteran corporate leader, the author of the book Leading Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and as I just told you, one of the world's OG DEI experts. She's played a major role in inventing the field of DEI. So I'm so proud and so happy, thrilled and excited to have on the show Dr. Rohini Anand. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Rohini Anand. I'm so grateful that you agreed to join us on this podcast. So thank you, and loads of love and gratitude to you.
Thank you, Parmesh. It's my pleasure. When you reached out to me and asked me to do this, I had to say yes, because having a conversation with you is a highlight for me.
Thank you. You know, this podcast episode is a chance for all our listeners to just get to know you and your incredible work that you've done and you keep on doing better. So I want to start very much at the beginning by this one moment that you describe in the introduction to your book, Leading Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. For everyone who is listening, this is the Bible. This is the book that really all of us in the field go to first and use it as our operating manual. And Rohini, in that book, you know, before you became this giant of a leader, a beacon in the corporate world, you describe this moment where you're a very young woman in the 1970s, sitting on an aeroplane for the first time, headed to the US to study, and your stopover is in Heathrow. And you see that the only other South Asian women there are the cleaners in the bathroom. And it gives you this shock, this jolt of recognition that you're coming from a place of incredible social privilege and also absolute outsider status, perhaps, where you'll be going, right? So can you share a little bit about your early life before that first plane ride? What did it take for you to make that journey? Both me and I think our listeners as well would really love to know, how did this journey before contribute to making you the leader that you became after?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And, thank you for talking about my book. And Parmesh, thank you for your contributions to the book, because, you're on all of those pages that I have written. So really appreciate that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, to provide some context, in the 1970s, I came to the United States as a single young immigrant woman. And in those days, a lot of my colleagues were not necessarily working. Some were, of course, but, some had done their bachelor's and were getting married. And, my father had studied in California. He went to the United States after doing his bachelor's. He was a gold medalist in physics. This was pre-partition, right? The scholarship that he got to go to the United States was in film. So he was, a bit of a maverick, because he did film. He worked with the likes of Cary Grant, went on to get the Golden Bear Award. And the reason I share this is because he encouraged me. He said, "You want to do your master's? I think this would be good." And, while he had himself faced racism in his travels through southern United States, he never let that sort of bias my view of the US and my experiences. Obviously, he had many, many very positive experiences. So, that particular incident that I described in the book of, landing at Heathrow, and the only other South Asian women, Indian women that I see are women in colorful salwar kameezes, cleaning the toilets, cleaning the airport. And in my mind, it was a sudden sort of reality check, the shock, would I be lumped together with them? And, I started thinking about things like my skin color, my accent, and also, you mentioned privilege, right? So would my association or the way I'm being perceived, would that diminish my class privilege? So it was, sort of a new awareness, a new awakening for me that took many, many years to unpack.
I mean, I just want to understand, India, plain master's in history, PhD in identity, and then you go to the corporate sector. What was that?
So for me, it was not such an intentional kind of a decision, right? So I had done history in Elphinstone College, and that was sort of a logical progression for me. But if I can just talk about one other thing, Parmesh, in terms of this, the privilege piece, right?
Yeah.
Because, you asked me about how did that lead you to the work that you do also, right? So
Yeah.
I think this DEI work is very personal. And my story, it always comes from a place of your story. So, right? So my story is very integral to who I am. Because growing up in Mumbai, I was surrounded by others like you, right? Who pretty much looked like me. And with that came this privilege of not having to think about my identity. I didn't have to give it any thought. That plane ride, that move to the United States, it was very pivotal, both literally and figuratively, because now I was not the center of my world, right? I was perceived as a foreigner. I was perceived as an immigrant. I was perceived as an outsider, as you said. And, I was completely unprepared for that. So it was only when I was perceived as a minority did I recognize the privileges that I had being part of a majority. And that's really what this work is about. I hadn't recognized those growing up in India. So this work really for me is about leveling the playing field. It is about understanding what it means to be an outsider, because that's really the core of DEI work. So, for me, as I like to say, my vocation and my avocation are perfectly aligned.
And also, as you're recognizing that you have privilege, but you're a minority, you're grappling with this tension of, but you don't want to be like the women that you met in the airport, although you are very much like them, and that tension. And from that comes this career, right? So, I mean, and I don't know if
Absolutely.
we resolve any of our tensions, but I think as we go through life, we can, yeah,
Yeah, I think you become aware of
you
them. And
can,
I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
the key thing.
yeah.
And how you're perceived and how that self-awareness informs, what you do and how you interact with people. I
Yeah, and then
think
how you
that is
use
very
whatever you
critical.
can to make the world
Absolutely
better,
right.
right?
The question that you asked me about how did I land up in corporate America,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But honestly, after I got my PhD, I wanted to do something that was, had more of an impact,
yeah,
as where I could see the results. So I worked for a nonprofit initially, heading up, they were doing multicultural conferences, and I kind of led their consulting practice. But what happened was when I met the CEO of Sodexo, Michel
yeah,
Londel,
yeah,
I was so amazed with his leadership, with his vision, with his conviction. And I saw this as an opportunity. I mean, I was working as a consultant for this nonprofit. And this was an opportunity for me to really shape and change the culture of an organization internally. But when I joined Sodexo, I had no idea they had a very serious lawsuit
yeah,
that was filed by African Americans. It was a promotion discrimination lawsuit. And initially, I really questioned the wisdom of the organization in hiring me. I'm not African American, I'm Asian. And, why would they hire someone like me to resolve this
yeah.
issue?
And this
It
is
took
around
me by surprise.
2002, right? This is around 2000.
Correct, exactly,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Took me completely by surprise. But I have to say, you connecting it back to the question you asked me earlier about the self-awareness, that was the biggest learning I have ever had in my career. Because I had to learn how to listen to people's lived experiences that are different from mine without diminishing them, without saying, oh, you're overreacting, plus and build trust with them. People
yeah,
who are very different from me.
yeah,
And without their generosity of spirit
yeah,
of these African American leaders, I would never have been successful. At the same time, the leadership was all white. And I had to be that bridge and build trust with them.
yeah.
So that to me was really sort of pivotal and shaped how I approach this work.
Yeah, and then of course you became very famous. One of your early legendary achievements at Sodexo was the gender balance case study, in which you actually proved the business case for improved women representation there, right? So, in a sense, you were able to bridge your academic knowledge and influence corporate policy. Do you want to tell our listeners something about that? And for everyone listening, remember, this is 25 years ago. It's the beginning of DEI as a practice. It's the beginning of DEI as a discipline. It's very rare and unique for organizations to even think about this, yeah?
Yeah, thanks, Parmesh. So I think there's certain things that we did right. So one was sort of this leadership commitment and conviction.
Yeah.
The leadership at the top, but it took work. So that particular piece is very important. And the CEO, I mentioned him, Michel Londel, he had this conviction and commitment and, for various reasons, but for business reasons also, right? So he positioned me right. So a year after I joined, I was reporting into HR. He had me report to him, which is a big deal. At that time, was a very big deal. He made me sort of, do this work globally. He provided resources. He took a stand. I'll share one quick story with you.
Yes.
Early on, I remember very clearly, I joined in January. In June was Gay Pride Month.
Yeah.
And I put on our website, information about Gay Pride Month because the organization had never focused on this.
Yeah.
I got personal hate mail with passages from the Bible saying you're corrupting the morals of this company. Fast forward, I like to say we went from class action to best in class because it's a, very different culture. But he took a stand. I remember a client basically saying that I want you to take off your information about your Pride employee resource group. Now, any other leader might have said, oh, we're going to lose a client. But he took a stand. He said, look, this is part of who we are. If they don't like it, forget it.
Yeah.
There are enough organizations that, are aligned with our values.
Yes.
So we're not taking off this information. So that is, to me, leadership commitment and conviction, because you have to be. But The other thing is this piece about this gender study that you talk about. I think what happened was we made a very clear case about the importance of DEI to the business. So two things. One is we did do this research. I had been sharing data from McKinsey and Catalyst and, Credit Suisse and Deloitte and everywhere about the business case. And the managers were saying, okay, but we're different. We're a different organization. So what we did was we looked at data from 50,000 managers, 70 to 100 entities around the world. And we correlated what we call gender balanced teams, or teams with 40 to 60% women, with the KPIs, the key performance indicators that were important to us. So if I remember correctly, they were client retention, employee engagement, safety, and financial outcomes. And on each one of those 5 KPIs, the teams that were gender balanced outperformed. Okay, but this is what's interesting. So if you had less than 40%, clearly you didn't get as good results. But when you get more than 60%, the results started plateauing. So what that says is it's not about any group being better than the other.
Yeah.
You just have to have that optimal mix. But one other thing, Parmesh, that I'll say about this business case that we built was when I joined, at the time, Sodexo was in the United States in 12,000 locations, globally in 40,000 locations, because we, provide food and facilities management.
Yeah, I just want to tell everyone who's listening that Sodexo is a staffing company. So that's the business.
Right.
Yeah.
So food and facilities management.
Correct.
But you're right, a lot of people employed.
Yeah.
So my thing was, how are we going to change the culture of an organization that's so geographically dispersed with managers working out of, for instance, the Godrej location, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And what started happening, and I will admit that this was not an intentional strategy, landed on it, and then I milked it. Then I really leveraged it. So as we cascaded our materials, our initiatives, our trainings, the client started noticing. So for instance, Godrej would say, what you're doing is very interesting. Can we get some more information on it? Can we attend the training?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, this white male middle-level managers in the United States, they were largely white male, now have interactions with the clients in a very different way.
Yeah.
They're not seen as running the cafeteria, but on a leadership issue, on a C-suite issue, they're being called in. So they started then reaching out to my team and me and saying, can you come in and speak to Godrej? Can you come in and speak to Google or wherever? So all of a sudden now it became a pull where diversity became a differentiator that provided access, that led to business development. And in the process, my team would touch $1 billion worth of business a year.
Wow.
So that business case became very, very critical. And then the last thing that I'll say is that the metrics were very important, in terms of doing it right, because there was an incentive link to diversity and it was decoupled from the financial performance of the company. So, whether your company did well revenue-wise or not, this was paid out. So those, I think, were the 3 things that, we did right, but that gender study was very pivotal in making the case for why DEI was important, as was quantifying the impact on the business.
Thank you. As you were talking, we've done some of these things at Godrej as well, right? So linking senior leaders' compensation last year, we mandated that 15% of all senior leader goals are linked to either people or planet, and quantifiable, measurable, and 15% of their performance will be judged on this, irrespective of financial performance. And it's been amazing to see how in 1 year, everyone's numbers have moved. Everyone is doing better as well. So just some of these nudges have helped. And because you've done it, because so many other companies have done it, when we suggest ideas like this, we're like, it's been proven, other people have done it, we do it, and then we build that case for it. Likewise, the same way that you said about how you became known for that and were advising others, there are so many other case studies. For all our listeners, IBM went through the same journey. They actually spun it off because they realized that because they were one of the first companies to talk about LGBTQIA consulting, they realized that as they were developing software solution for clients, the clients were asking them about this. So soon they started giving them the training modules until someone at IBM said, hey, wait a minute. this could be a vertical. And so they spun it off as a vertical, and I believe it now makes them tons of money as well. So it could either be a revenue generating source, it could be something else, but clearly, I mean, when someone does it, it does well, it helps others to do it, and then you profit in so many other directions that you could not imagine also. In your case, it was elevating Sodexo to think of itself as differently and to place itself up the value chain and also make a ton of money. But for so many other people, it could be something else, right? Like when Lemon Tree does it, they get more customers because when you stay at a Lemon Tree hotel, you know that 20% or 30% of the staff are persons with disabilities and with pride, right? So
exactly, yeah. And the other example is Merrill Lynch.
Yes.
We were talking about Todd Sears earlier.
Yeah.
And what he did was, he developed this team that reached out to the LGBTQ community in terms of their estate planning.
Yeah.
And, the target was $24 million a year for this particular niche market.
Yeah.
And over 4 years, they generated $1.2 billion, I think, in revenue.
Yeah.
I think the important thing is to make it an enabler of business success, however you look at that, whether it's a people piece or engagement or productivity or revenue generation. I think that's the key piece.
Yeah. So, Rohini, while you were doing all of this at Sodexo, America was changing, right? Again, on the streets, and it continues. Disproportionate police violence against African Americans, for example, culture wars heating up, Gen Z finding its own voice. While you were doing this work at Sodexo, how was your own thinking changing or evolving? And what were some of the responses you were seeing around you, not at Sodexo? And maybe, who were you being inspired by in terms of, other leaders in corporate America, or maybe not even in corporate America? Like, as this work was growing, where were you learning from?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, in doing this work, you really have to be very tuned to the external ecosystem, because that really informs how you do this work, right? And with diversity, equity, and inclusion transformation work, there's always this pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other. There are always headwinds, right? There's always opposition, whether it's internal or whether it's external. So that's nothing new. What started to happen, I mean, if you look at it, right? So, when I started doing this work, it was a lot about compliance, right? It was, we have to keep out of trouble.
Yeah.
It evolved to let's make, okay, we'll do this work because it's good for the organization. Some actually went to the extent of making this, core to the business, that it benefits the business, right? But a lot of organizations were just, doing it. It was never central till the murder of George Floyd.
Correct.
Right? And that's when, you have this flurry of sort of engagement, appointments of chief diversity officers increased exponentially. Billions and billions of dollars were given for racial equity work, not just in the US, but globally. But once that we passed that, right, those that were doing it in a performative manner, just for branding reasons, started dialing down. Many of those commitments were never delivered on. For those that it was important that they really saw the business benefits, stuck with it. So for me, listening to what's happening in the external world, but staying focused on the core pieces, regardless of what's happening externally. Now there's a lot of backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion.
On the anti-woke movement.
Absolutely, the anti-woke movement and all that. But it's those companies that see the benefit to the business that may decide to call it something else that's happening. They're calling it, rather than DEI, they're calling it inclusion and culture. They're leading with inclusion. They're doing it so, they're not necessarily drawing attention to the work. In fact, Larry Fink, BlackRock CEO, said that we're going to continue to do our CSR work, but we're not going to necessarily publicize it. So long as that work is being done, I think you've got to really sort of think about what is fundamental to your organization, regardless of what's happening outside. But at the same time, be tuned to the external, headwinds and adjust your strategies accordingly. So
yeah, no, I like that you place it in context and say there's always been, there have always been headwinds. So this backlash that we are seeing now is nothing new. We faced it before and it will always be there. And we've always managed it. I want to actually ask you about what you said about performative versus real. And, in a sense, that's the crux of the work we do, right? And in a sense, that's how the field of DI has grown. So what does real DI work look like in terms of being comprehensive, and what would performative DI work look like? I'm sure all our listeners of this podcast and the millions and millions that are out there are only interested in real work. We believe in performance, but, go to the theater, go to the cinema and pay for the performances you consume, but in work, so let it be real. So tell us about the difference between these two.
With the murder of George Floyd going viral, a lot of organizations were doing, work to check the box, to just look good to the public, to have figureheads. And it was very external facing. And I'll tell you, Parmesh, that my advice to organizations has always been, first, clean your own house.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're doing it right internally.
Yeah.
So there's no disconnect between how your employees experience you and what you're saying to the external world.
Correct.
So, I think the performative piece is, as you said, theater, it's optics, it's, for the sake of the brand. It is about making sure that you've got commitment at all levels in the organization. Making sure that DI is embedded in your core processes, not just HR, marketing and sales and AI, I think you've got to really make sure that it's everywhere, that people are talking about it. They're asking for the diversity lead to come and help them view things. For instance, I'm on the advisory board of Sanofi. And Sanofi is one of those organizations that really is very substantive in what they do. For them, it's about health equity.
Correct.
Right? It's about diversity in clinical trials, because all this impacts their revenue, impacts their bottom line.
Yeah.
Treat it like any other business imperative.
Yeah.
Measure it, hold people accountable, report regularly. Those are the things that make it sustainable, so that it becomes very much a part of the lexicon of the organization and the DNA of the organization.
Because now you consult globally. Are these things that you see everyone doing across the world? Is there a local context to some of these things, or are DI principles, fundamental like values and not context dependent?
That's a very interesting question that you asked, right? So I think clearly I don't necessarily see organizations across the board, engaging in a transformation. Oftentimes people say we want a training, but towards what end? What are you solving for, right? Sometimes it may be an entry point, but I think you've got to really ask yourself the question, what are the pain points in the organization? If it's a training, what is the intended outcome? What are we solving for there? So not all organizations do it. But I think to your second point about the local context, I think the context is absolutely critical. I'll give you a very quick example about one client that I worked with. They had a race training.
Yeah.
And the race training was developed in the United States, and they were rolling it out globally. Now, race is very contextual. It's very universal, but it's very local, right? Racism is universal, but it is very contextual. And, you've got to treat it, address it within that context. So they had an activity which was a hot button activity. And they put up these two cards in India, right? One was guns and the other was abortion. Now, in the United States, those two words trigger a lot of reactions, very polarizing. But in India, it landed flat completely. So the folks in India said, well, if you had put up religion and divorce, those two things would have gotten people. You've got to contextualize this work. And in doing that, you've got to take the support of local change agents, because, you know the entry points in India. You know how to, address these issues. So, but on the other hand, there are certain things that are universal. Your core values. So if I can take the example of LGBTQ, right? I think there are different ways of approaching it, because there are laws, right? That penalize people who are gay.
And for multinational companies, it's hard if you're operating in different markets, and, some of which have LGBTQIA marriage and some of which criminalize it, right?
Precisely. Now, Kenji Yoshino has a great model, right, where he talks about, when in Rome, and some
Correct.
companies basically abide by the laws.
Yeah.
There are other companies that have the embassy model, which
Correct.
basically says that, within the walls of our organization,
Yeah.
we are going to provide you the same benefits
Yeah.
that we provide in LGBTQ liberal countries.
Yeah.
And then there are others that are advocates that,
Yeah.
push for change. And I think there's a way of doing it. So if I can connect your, localizing piece with this example.
Yeah.
So in the book, I actually talk about Barclays, when they were in Singapore, at the time, Singapore had anti-LGBTQ laws. Now, of course, it's changed, which is wonderful, right?
Yeah.
But what they did was, along with other MNCs, other multinationals, they supported this Pink Dot Festival.
Yes.
Okay, financially, and they got local organizations involved. So the signal was, this is a safe place for the LGBTQ community. Now, in 2018, when the Singaporean government banned multinationals from supporting or sponsoring this Pink Dot Festival, they had done their advocacy work, low key, behind the scenes, because there were enough local companies that took it on and kept it going.
Correct. Yeah.
So there's a way of doing it, which is not it can be behind the scenes. I think that adhering to a local context means understanding it. It doesn't mean that you don't gently push for change, because, in the United States, living here in the US, there's certain things that I've lived here so long, I don't see till someone like you comes from the outside and you're able to point certain things out.
Yeah.
That help to be a disruptor.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I love Kenji's work. I've used it in Queeristan a lot. And, it's been also great to meet him personally and hang out and learn so much from him. And that model is actually so useful. So for everyone listening, you can actually find the white paper on their website, as indeed so many of their writing as well. Or just, buy Rohini and my books together. If you go online, maybe you'll get a package deal for both of them. You spoke about being transformative, right? And that also has potential, but it's also, being not safe is also risky, right? And I'm thinking about how in 2008 at Sodexo itself, there were transformational moves made towards women's inclusion. You created a program that addresses the gender talent gap by looking at violence against women through workshops, communications, and policies. These are many companies would not talk about, say, violence against women in their workplace. They would focus on, say, safer things. So what are the risks and rewards of doing something which is, say, not safe? If you can just tell us a little bit about, say, maybe from that experience.
Yeah. So I think, you've got to have the courage to push the needle. And I often say that, change happens at the intersection of people and processes, right?
Yeah.
So you can have the best processes in place. And I think you have to, embed DEI in processes. But ultimately, it's the people piece that, gets at the heart, that transforms leaders, that transforms people.
Yeah.
So I think if you can humanize some of these issues and bring it close to people, then they're more willing to address it. And that's how we address this, whole issue of violence against women is sharing the stories. And when you see it's one of your colleagues who is courageous enough to share their lived experience, that also takes a lot of courage, right?
Yeah.
As some say, whatever the issue is, it's like coming out of the closet again and again and again.
Yeah.
And that's painful. It's not easy to do.
Yeah.
But if you can humanize that, both humanize, but also make the business connection.
Yeah.
So, where we actually did this, addressing violence against women, it was also about, sort of the lost productivity.
Correct.
Where women were away from work.
Yeah.
And even when they were at work, there's something called presenteeism where they couldn't focus. And I think it goes to the LGBTQ community. I mean, that parallel is amazing, because when you don't have a sense of belonging, or any outsider group, you can't contribute to your fullest. I'll give you an example. I talked about Sanofi, that I'm on the advisory board of. they're actually doing something very brave. They're going to address National Hijab Day. Now, that's a very brave thing for a French company to do. That came from the employee resource group.
Yeah.
So, I think that it does take courage, but I think you have to humanize these issues, and storytelling plays a great role in that. So,
Yeah. And support it with just making the workplace completely safe for all employees
absolutely right.
to belong, right?
Yeah.
You spoke about Kenji and various models in terms of where an organization wants to go, and about context being everything, right? So in some parts of the world, maybe race plays a more important consideration. In others, it could be age or gender or disability or LGBTQIA or, caste, religion, so many manifestations. When you're now working with, companies as a consultant, as a board member, how do you make sure that they achieve their goals purposefully, intentionally, without compromising on these perhaps conflicting considerations, right? So how do you operationalize some of this intersectionality in some of these organizations that you're working with? It's not easy, and we've been grappling with this both at Godrej and, in the larger Indian DI space ourselves. But I just wanted to hear from you, and I wanted our listeners from you about how you are working through some of these.
Yeah, I think, intersectionality is very critical. We tend to sort of pigeonhole people. But, for me, yes, I'm a woman, I'm an Asian immigrant, I'm a professional, I'm straight, cisgender, I'm able-bodied. These are all part of my identities, and I have privilege in certain areas, So again, I think you've got to look at individuals through that intersectional lens. And I think that where you're measuring things, in fact, let me tell you a quick story about sort of, able-bodied privilege.
Yeah.
I remember very clearly when I was doing a workshop years and years ago, I did this workshop. I was fairly junior, and I did this workshop for a group of 50 people that were not sighted. They were blind. Okay. I had not thought through my own sighted privilege at that point in time.
Yeah.
So I go in there and I do this piece, and then I ask them a question. Okay. Now, in that room of 50 people, 20 people raise their hands.
Yeah.
Okay. But how do I call on them? They don't know I'm calling on, one X individual. They don't know that there are 20 people that have raised their hands. And I had a very hard time figuring that out in the moment.
Correct.
Because I had not thought through my own sighted privilege.
Yeah.
So we all have privilege in some aspects of our identity, but we are all intersectional human beings. And I think more and more I encourage employee resource groups, for instance, to work across those dimensions, so they can allow people this chance to really lean into their intersectional identities. But the other piece that I will say is that one of the things, and we talked about measurement, right? So what often happens is people talk about representation goals, like, so many women, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's important. I mean, I think it's important to have that. But what's also important is to have what I call the lead indicators, right? These are those actions and behaviors that need to be measured, that need to hold managers accountable for, because those, if done consistently, will change the culture in an organization. So that's another opportunity to really address intersectionality, because you can then start looking at what is it that an organization or leader should be doing to really nurture that intersectionality. So what are they doing in terms of, disabilities, or how are they mentoring or coaching people who are different than themselves? How are they sponsoring individuals? All those things done consistently.
And all those things should be on goal sheets and measured and rewarded, right?
Absolutely right.
And then representation is a lag indicator then to you.
Exactly right. I mean, that's the outcome you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's these things that done consistently will change the culture and get to the lag indicator, the representation.
Well, thank you for everyone listening. I hope you realize this is a masterclass with Rohini. Rohini, for anyone who's listening and who wants to consult with Rohini Anand, LLC, how do they get in touch with you? I mean, I know millions of people listen to our podcast already. billions actually. Why millions only? I mean, if they're not in the US where you live and work, if they're in India and they want to hang out with you and they want you to come in, how do they do that?
Yeah, thanks, Parmesh. So all my information is on my website. It's www.rohinianand.com. So you can go on the website and, see all the work and, reach out to me through that.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, besides the consulting and because of your decades of expertise as a practitioner, but also before that through the PhD as a researcher, as a thinker, where do you see this discipline of DI going intellectually as well as in terms of growth, right? Do you see it's becoming a field? At our lab, we're trying to map this and we are seeing all kinds of programs all over the world. Some are 1 week long, some are now 2 years long in terms of master's programs. Are you seeing it evolve as a field with, specialities? And you had to figure your way out, right? But if someone today says, I want to do DI, I want to be a DI professional in the same way I want to be a finance professional or a marketing professional, what would you advise them to study?
So I think, clearly there are sort of courses and programs and certificates on DEI. The two that come to mind are Georgetown University has one, which is very good. Cornell University has one. So there are, I think, doing internships in this field is always a great idea because it gives you hands-on experience. But I also think that if you're in an organization, get involved in their DEI efforts. If it's not there, launch something.
Yeah.
I remember there's one young person who basically was in the tech field at Sodexo, actually. And he became involved in the ERG, and he became so involved that when I had an open position to manage the ERGs, he went all out. He prepared himself, he applied for the job, he got it. And now he's heading up, DEI for a big company.
Yeah.
So, show that your passion, show your interest, get involved. But there are definitely courses that do it. In terms of the field itself, I think that this is one of those, fields that really draws on all your leadership skills because it's about your understanding of the business. It's about strategy. It's about your relationship building skills. It's about culture change and transformation.
Yeah. Also psychology.
Absolutely. Every single thing. So it's like, any other leadership position. So to me, regardless of what happens, and I said this before, Parmesh, that there are headwinds, there are, you're right. In the headlines, you're seeing organizations like Walmart or McDonald's, dialing back and dismantling.
Yeah.
There are organizations like Costco, where the board has said that, this is important enough, we're going to stay with it.
Yeah.
But many organizations are definitely doing the work, but not doing it in a public-facing way.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to go away because customers want it, employees want it.
Yeah.
Think about Gen Z, They want, for them, this is part of who they are.
Yeah.
To me, it's not going away. We just have to weather the storm. We have to be resilient and keep doing what we're doing.
And irrespective, it's going to need talent to work in these places and to understand. So you're saying having someone who can have a blend of all these various fields and experiences would be much better to do the agile work that a DI professional is required to do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we know it's not going away, but how is it going to look like in the future? So if you were to crystal ball glaze, what does good DI look like at an organization of the future? I don't know what the future is now. Earlier, it used to be 50 years, but maybe let's just say 5 years from now.
So I think, all this noise, the headwinds, I personally think it'll settle down. Good DI looks like, where it is part of our daily lexicon. It's where whoever the professional is on DEI is called on to advise in every aspect of the business, whether it's AI, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's advertising, whether it's HR, talent, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It looks like, organizations have truly embedded DEI in all aspects. They've demonstrated the benefit to the business and to talent, and it really becomes truly an enabler of business success. So I sort of go back and forth with this piece around, completely embedding DEI And it depends on the organization's maturity, to be honest. There's
Yeah.
some organizations, where P&G, maybe others, where it might work because it's so much a part of the ethos of the organization. But on the other hand, if it's not called out,
Yeah.
it can be lost. So I go back and forth between the two. But regardless, I think personally it's here to stay.
Yeah. It's here to stay. It's pervasive. It's not just in corporations, it's in schools, colleges, society, everywhere.
And
Yeah.
if I can add one
Yes,
other quick
please.
thing,
Yeah.
regardless of what happens in the United States, I think India
Yeah.
can really demonstrate and take a leadership position in this. I find that many countries and companies in Europe are very slow to move.
Yeah.
India is nimble,
Yeah.
agile, and I think can really take, the leadership in a very, very multicultural country.
No, you're right. And in fact, we have headwinds here, of course, but we also have tailwinds, right? We have companies that care. We have various national and state governments. There are different priorities for everyone, but all of them care about something or the other, as we are seeing in our practice, both at Godrej as well as when we talk to or work alongside other companies as well. We have people that care. We have, an economy which is growing, maybe 1% up, 1% down, but it's growing. So it's an incredible moment right now to be part of this transformation here. And you're right. I think if we can learn, if we can work alongside, other regions, other parts of the world, learn from each other, and from pioneers like you who, in a sense, made the field happen, we can evolve the field to where it needs to grow next. So I'm very, very grateful that you agreed to come here to chat with us, to share your wisdom, your knowledge, your years of experience with all our listeners. And I can't wait to meet you in person, hang out with you, show you our Godrej DI lab, and make you meet our wild and fun team and hang out with all of us. And until then, sending you a big, 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 big hug over the airwaves to the chilly part of wherever you are in the US.
Thank you, Parmesh, and to you as well. Look forward to seeing you, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And everyone, that was India Included with Dr. Rohini Anand. I hope you like it. Please follow Rohini. She's a star on LinkedIn. Please read her book. Of course, please follow us as well. We are like a baby star, just about starting to shine bright. But show us love online, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Insta. And keep on being good, keep on doing good, keep on imagining and reimagining the world around you to be better. Lots and lots of love.
Thank you for listening to India Included. If you enjoyed this episode, tell us. Please subscribe or follow and leave a rating and review on the podcast app you're listening to. To find out more about us and the work we do, visit godrejdeilab.com. You can also find us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Godrej DEI Lab. Stay tuned for more.